Let us start with something your financial advisor probably never told you in those exact words. Money, past a certain point, stops being a reward for your labor. It starts being a generator. It produces more of itself, quietly, automatically, sometimes faster than you can spend it. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud. Compound interest. Everyone knows compound interest. It is in every personal finance book ever written. But knowing the words and actually feeling the architecture of what happens at scale, those are two completely different experiences. Here is what most people picture when they hear about investing. They imagine a slow, grinding process. You earn money, you save some, you invest it, it grows a little, you repeat. Year after year, it feels like filling a bathtub with a garden hose. That is accurate for a while, but there is a threshold. And around $1 million, something structural shifts. The hose starts to feel less relevant, because now the water is filling the tub from the inside. Let us talk about what that actually looks like in numbers. And remember, these are not promises or projections. These are simply illustrations of how the math behaves. The broad U.S. stock market has returned, on average, roughly 7% per year after adjusting for inflation, measured over long historical periods. That number is debated, it fluctuates, it is not guaranteed. But it is the benchmark most serious long-term investors use. 7% of $100,000 is $7,000 a year. That is a nice bonus. You could take a good vacation with that. But it does not change your life. You still need your job. You still need your income. The investment is a supplement. 7% of $500,000 is $35,000 a year. That is meaningful. That could cover rent in a mid-sized city. But you are still somewhat dependent on your salary, your work, your effort. 7% of $1 million is $70,000 a year. Without doing anything. Without showing up. Without a performance review or a boss or a commute. That number sits, for most American households, right around the median household income, the middle of the pack, the average. The money that most families are working full-time jobs to earn. Your portfolio, at $1 million invested, is generating that same amount in the background. And this is where the psychology shifts in ways that nobody really talks about. Because here is what is strange. When you first cross that number, you might not feel different. You might check your brokerage app, see the comma in the right place, and feel a kind of quiet disbelief, maybe relief, maybe nothing at all. But the change is not emotional. It is structural, and it shows up in your decisions before you even realize it is happening. You start saying no differently. Not dramatically. Just with less anxiety. You negotiate differently at work because the exit cost is lower. You take different kinds of risks in your career because failure is less catastrophic. You make choices about your time differently because you have a silent partner that never sleeps and never takes a day off. This is what people mean when they talk about financial freedom, but they usually say it in a vague, motivational poster kind of way that misses the actual mechanics. The freedom is not about buying whatever you want. It is about decoupling your survival from your daily effort. And that decoupling, subtle at first, compounds on itself. Because 7% a year on 1 million is 70,000. But what happens the next year? If you reinvest it, if you do not touch it, your base is now roughly 1,070,000. 7% of that is 74,900. Year 3, higher. Year 5, higher still. After 10 years of doing absolutely nothing, no new contributions, no active management, just existing, a $1 million portfolio at that historical average rate becomes approximately $1,967,000. Nearly double. From doing nothing. After 20 years, the same logic pushes that figure past 3,800,000. This is not speculation. This is arithmetic. And the reason it matters is because at this scale, the engine of growth eventually outpaces almost any savings rate a normal salaried worker could achieve. Think about that for a moment. A household saving aggressively 15–20% of a solid income might add $30,000, maybe $50,000 a year to their investments. But at $1 million invested, the portfolio is potentially generating $70,000 on its own. The math crosses over. The money is outworking the person. That crossover point. When your portfolio's returns exceed your ability to contribute, is the invisible threshold, and it happens somewhere in the vicinity of that first million, depending on your income and savings rate. But here is the part that does not make it into the highlight reels. Volatility does not care about your milestones. In a year when markets drop 25 or 30%, and those years happen, they have happened multiple times in the last 2 decades. A $1 million portfolio does not just dip a little, it drops $250,000 in a single year. On paper. For someone who spent 8 years carefully saving and investing to reach that number, watching it fall by $250,000 in 12 months is psychologically brutal in a way that smaller balances simply are not. This is why the rules change after the first million. Not just the math, the risk profile changes. The emotional stakes change. Because now there is something real to lose, something large enough to actually matter in the long term. And the instinct to protect it, to stop taking risk, to move into cash, to do something, is exactly what tends to derail long-term compounding. The irony is almost poetic. The same patience and discipline that got you to 1 million is suddenly tested most severely the moment you arrive. There is another layer here that most financial content skips because it is not exciting. It is taxes. At lower investment levels, taxes on gains are annoying but manageable. A few $1,000s in capital gains taxes each year. You adjust, you move on. At $1 million invested and growing, the tax conversation changes significantly. Long-term capital gains taxes in the United States can reach 20% at higher income levels, plus the net investment income tax, which adds another 3.8% at certain thresholds. State taxes layer on top of that in many states. Suddenly, how your investments are structured, which accounts hold what assets, how and when you realize gains, how you think about charitable giving or estate planning. All of these decisions carry real financial weight, decisions that, at smaller balances, were largely academic. This is why wealthy investors pay financial advisors, tax attorneys, and CPAs not as a luxury, but as a genuine return on investment. Because at scale, the difference between a well-structured and a poorly structured investment approach can be measured in tens of thousands of dollars annually, sometimes more. There is also a social dimension that almost no one talks about honestly. Money changes relationships, not always dramatically, not in a movie villain kind of way. But the quiet psychological shift in how you relate to people, to your work, to your peers, to your family, is real. You start seeing certain conversations differently. Friends complaining about expenses, family members asking for loans, colleagues stressing about layoffs. You are still in those conversations, but from a different vantage point. And navigating that gap, often silently, without sounding either defensive or condescending, is its own kind of challenge. There is a word that has emerged in financial psychology circles for the anxiety that comes with significant wealth accumulation, even when that wealth is paper wealth. It is not guilt exactly. It is closer to a kind of dissonance. You are statistically doing well. And yet the world does not fundamentally reorganize itself around your portfolio balance. Life keeps arriving with its ordinary complications. The car still breaks down. The relationship still needs work. The health scare still comes. Money solves exactly the problems that money can solve, which is more than nothing. It is genuinely significant. But it is also a narrower category than most people imagine when they are working toward the goal. Let us zoom out now. Because the $1 million threshold is not just a personal story, it is also a lens on something much bigger happening in the American economy. The number of Americans who have reached $1 million or more in investable assets has grown significantly over the last several decades, accelerated by bull markets, home equity appreciation, and the expansion of retirement accounts. Estimates suggest that somewhere in the range of 22 to 24 million Americans now fall into the millionaire category by net worth. But here is what that number obscures. Wealth in the United States is extraordinarily concentrated above that level. The first million is, in a global and historical context, enormously significant. But within the domestic wealth distribution, $1 million in invested assets places you in a category that is comfortable and secure, but not in the same conversation as the upper fraction of a percent who hold assets measured in the tens or hundreds of millions. Compound growth works the same way for everyone, but it compounds on what you already have. So the gap between the person with $1 million and the person with $100 million does not stay constant. It expands. Every year, automatically. The engine does not discriminate, it just scales. So what do you do with all of this? If you are not yet at 1 million invested, you are probably somewhere in the long accumulation phase, which most people experience as slow and frustrating and occasionally pointless. And that is exactly where the math is least visible, because the early compounding is small enough that it is easy to dismiss. If you are approaching that threshold, the useful thing to know is that the rules really do shift, not just financially, strategically. The emphasis moves from aggressive accumulation toward protection, tax efficiency, and structural clarity. And if you are past it, you already know that the arrival does not feel the way you imagined it would. The milestone is quiet. The conveyor belt starts moving almost imperceptibly. And then one year, you look at the numbers and realize that your portfolio contributed more to your net worth than your salary did. That is the moment. Not the day you cross the number. The day you realize the game has changed and has been changing for a while without announcing itself. Here is the question worth sitting with, regardless of where you are in this journey. We spend enormous amounts of cultural energy celebrating the earning of money. The salary negotiation, the business success, the stock option that vested. We have entire industries built around helping people earn more. But the mechanism that actually determines long-term financial outcomes for most Americans is not income. It is time in market, savings rate, and the structural behavior of compounding over decades, which raises a question that is not rhetorical and does not have a clean answer. If the math is this clear, if the engine of compound growth is this well documented, this widely available, this arithmetically inevitable, why does the gap between those who reach that first million and those who do not keep widening? That answer lives somewhere in the intersection of wages, behavioral economics, access, and the way human beings relate to distant future rewards. And it is more complicated than any single YouTube video can resolve. But the first step is understanding the architecture. Knowing what the machine actually does once it gets large enough to run on its own, because you cannot optimize for a destination you do not understand. If this gave you something to think about, do the simple things. Like this video. Leave a comment with where you are in the process. Early accumulation, approaching the threshold, already past it, because those conversations in the comments are often more valuable than the video itself. Share it with someone who is thinking seriously about their financial future but has not yet seen the math laid out this clearly. And subscribe if you want to keep pulling on these threads, because there is a lot more underneath this one. The next number, after 1 million by the way, behaves very differently still, but that is a different video.